Thunder rolled across Red Mesa like the wrath of God himself, splitting the night sky with jagged white fire. Sister Miriam Odell stumbled through the mud-slicked main street, her bare feet torn and bleeding the torn fabric of her habit, clinging to her bruised body like a shroud. Behind her, the baying of hounds echoed through the canyon walls, accompanied by the thunder of hooves and the shouts of men drunk on the promise of bounty money. As lightning illuminated her gaunt face, memories crashed through her mind like shards of broken glass. 3 hours ago, she had been kneeling in prayer before the altar of St. Cecilia's, just as she had every night for 2 years. But tonight, Father Morrison had burst through the chapel doors, his face white with terror, clutching a leather satchel against his chest. Sister Miriam. He had gasped, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. They're coming. They know I've been documenting everything. The children. Dear God, what we've done to those children. She had tried to calm him, to understand his ravings about ledgers and photographs about Sheriff Crane, and terrible bargains struck in darkness. Then she had seen the contents of his satchel, page after page of meticulous records, names and dates and horrors that made her stomach turn. Emma Barrett, age 9, marked for transfer, but found dead 2 weeks later. Timothy Henderson, age 7, sold to men whose appetites defied description. Dozens of others, their young lives bartered away like cattle. I tried to save them, Morrison had whispered as boots thundered in the corridor outside. I marked the strong ones for transfer, hoping they might survive elsewhere. But Crane, he changed the orders. He killed them all. The chapel doors had exploded inward, revealing Sheriff Crane and his deputies, their faces twisted with murderous intent. Morrison had pressed the satchel into her hands. With his dying breath, his final words, a desperate plea: tell their families. Tell the world. Now, 3 hours later, Sister Miriam clutched that same satchel as she fled through the storm. At 26, she had believed in the goodness of humanity, in the sanctity of the church, in the protection of the innocent. Tonight, she had learned that evil could wear a collar, that corruption could hide behind holy vows, that children could be sacrificed on the altar of greed and power. Lightning revealed the pursuing shadows growing closer, their torches flickering like the fires of hell. She pressed herself against the adobe wall of Henderson's general store, gasping for breath that burned her lungs. The rain mixed with her tears, washing the blood from her wounds in pink rivulets that disappeared into the churning mud. In the alley between two buildings, a figure stood motionless, the silhouette of a woman in religious robes. Sister Agnes, the Mother Superior, who had watched Morrison's murder with cold calculation, who had nodded approval as Crane's men dragged away the screaming priest. But when Miriam blinked, the alley was empty. Had it been real, or merely another ghost haunting her shattered mind? The hounds were closer now. Sheriff Crane's voice bellowed above the storm. $10,000 for the murdering nun. She killed Father Morrison in cold blood. His words cut through the night like a blade, and Miriam knew her time was running out. With her last reserves of strength, she stumbled toward the outskirts of town, where a lone farmhouse stood silhouetted against the violent sky. Behind Eli Barrett's weathered barn, she collapsed into the mud unconscious as lightning split the world in two. In her hand, she still clutched the satchel containing the truth that could destroy Sheriff Crane, if she lived long enough to tell it. Dawn broke gray and sullen over Red Mesa, the storm having passed, but leaving behind an oppressive humidity that made the air thick as molasses. Eli Barrett woke to the sound of church bells tolling in the distance. Not the usual call to morning prayer, but something urgent and discordant that set his teeth on edge. At 39, his face bore the deep lines of a man who had seen too much grief. 3 years of isolation on his failing farm had carved hollow cheeks and given his green eyes a haunted quality. The place had been prosperous once, when his wife Sarah was alive, when their daughter Emma had filled the house with laughter. Now it felt like a tomb, He pulled on his worn boots and stepped onto the porch, surveying the 20 acres of struggling corn and the dilapidated barn. The distant sound of voices carried on the morning air, fearful, urgent whispers from town. In Red Mesa, unusual sounds usually meant trouble, and Sheriff Crane's idea of justice had a way of spreading like wildfire. Behind the barn, something dark lay crumpled in the mud. Eli approached cautiously, rifle ready, until he saw the torn black fabric of a nun's habit. The woman was unconscious, her breathing shallow. Despite the grime and blood, he could see she was young, with delicate features that spoke of gentler upbringing than most folks in these parts. A leather satchel lay beside her, its contents unknown, but clearly precious. The sound of approaching horses made him freeze. Through the morning haze, he could see riders coming, Sheriff Crane and his deputies, moving with predatory purpose. Eli made a decision that would change everything. He lifted the unconscious nun and carried her into the barn, hiding her behind hay bales just as the riders reached his gate. "Barrett." Crane's voice boomed across the yard. "We need to search your property." Virgil Crane was a man who used his size and reputation like weapons. Standing 6'4", with shoulders broad as an axe handle, he wore authority like armor and cruelty like a second skin. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, and his handlebar mustache couldn't hide the cruel set of his mouth. "Morning, Sheriff. What's the commotion?" "Dangerous criminal escaped from St. Cecilia's last night. Murdered Father Morrison in cold blood. Sister Miriam Odell. You seen anyone suspicious?" "Just the storm. Kept me up most the night." Deputy Cole, a younger man with honest eyes that seemed out of place in Crane's company, gave Eli a meaningful look. "Heard tell she might be wounded, boss. Could be holed up anywhere." But as Cole spoke, Eli noticed something odd. The deputy's hand rested on his gun butt, but his fingers were tapping out a pattern: 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code for SOS. A warning. "Mind if we search Barrett?" Crane's gaze swept the farm with calculating precision. "For the safety of decent folks." "Course not, help yourselves." 20 minutes later, after a thorough but fruitless search, Crane remounted his horse. $10,000 reward for her capture, Barrett. That's more money than this patch of dirt will ever be worth. As the posse rode away, Cole lingered. When the others were out of earshot, he leaned down from his saddle. "Not everyone believes Crane's version of what happened," he said quietly. "Some of us remember when Father Morrison was trying to help folks asking questions about missing children. You might want to be careful who you trust." After they were gone, Eli returned to the barn. The nun was awake now, her dark eyes wide with terror and pain. She tried to sit up, clutching her satchel, but collapsed back into the hay. "Easy, you're safe for now." "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They'll kill you for helping me. The letter. I have proof. Children." Her words dissolved into fevered muttering. But Eli had heard enough. He thought of his own Emma, lost to the very people this woman was running from, and felt something stir in his chest that had been dead for 3 years. By midday, the scorching sun had transformed Red Mesa into a furnace. Eli had spent the morning tending to Sister Miriam, cleaning her wounds, and trying to get water past her cracked lips. She drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling fragments that chilled his blood. Father Morrison, the children in the cellar, they made me watch. Around noon, old Mags arrived without explanation. Margaret Henley was 73, bent with arthritis and tougher than saddle leather. She'd delivered half the babies in Red Mesa and buried nearly as many. More importantly, she was one of the few people who openly challenged Sheriff Crane. "Heard you might need some doctoring," she said, her sharp blue eyes taking in the barn's interior. "How did you?" "Boy, I've been keeping secrets since before you were born. Now move aside." Mags examined Miriam with professional efficiency. "Beaten something fierce. These marks on her wrists. Rope burns. Recent. Someone hit her with something heavy. She looked up at Eli. Whatever she's running from, it ain't no church matter. Crane says she killed 2 priests. Virgil Crane wouldn't know truth from horse shit if his life depended on it. This girl's been tortured. She began cleaning wounds with practiced hands. Question is, what are you planning to do? Before Eli could answer, hoofbeats approached. Through a gap in the barn wall, they saw another group of rider strangers this time. Bounty hunters by the look of them. The lead rider was lean with dead eyes and a reputation that preceded him like bad smell. Jake Tolliver, known throughout the territory as a man who always brought back his quarry, usually dead. Barrett. Tolliver called out, "We're looking for a runaway nun. Heard she might have passed this way." Eli stepped out, positioning himself between the hunters and the barn door. Already told the sheriff haven't seen anyone. Now see, that's interesting. Tolliver's smile was thin as a blade. Because word is, she was heading this direction, and you being the only spread out here. He dismounted, hand resting on his gun. $10,000 buys a lot of thorough searching. This is private property. You got no authority here. The tension stretched tight. Tolliver's companions spread out, their intentions clear. In the barn, Eli could hear Mags whispering urgently to Miriam. Then from town, another rider appeared. Deputy Cole riding hard. "Tolliver Sheriff wants to see you. Now, we're conducting a search. Sheriff's orders. Said there's been a development. New information about the nun's whereabouts." Tolliver studied Cole's face, then remounted. "This ain't over, Barrett. 10,000's a lot of money, and there ain't many places to hide in this desert." After they left, Cole lingered. "They'll be back. And next time, I might not be around to run interference." In the barn, Miriam was sitting up, fever, having broken temporarily. She looked at Eli with desperate hope. "The letter. You have to see what they're capable of." Inside the satchel was a single sheet of paper covered in careful handwriting. As Eli read, his hands began to tremble. Names, dates, detailed accounts of systematic abuse at St. Cecilia's Orphanage, children who had disappeared, bribes paid to local officials, and at the center, like a spider in its web, Sheriff Virgil Crane. At the bottom, in different handwriting, "For my beloved daughter, Emma Barrett, and all the other innocents. May God forgive us. Father Thomas Morrison." Eli's legs gave out. Father Morrison had taken Emma to the orphanage 3 years ago, promising she'd be safe. The same priest who told him she'd died of fever 2 weeks later. The same priest Crane claimed had been murdered by this nun. He was trying to make it right. Miriam whispered. "Morrison came to me the night before they killed him. Said he couldn't live with the lies anymore. My daughter, what happened to Emma?" Miriam's eyes filled with tears. She tried to tell someone about what happened in the night. They said she was making stories, but Morrison knew better. He tried to protect her, but 3 years of guilt, 3 years of accepting what he'd been told, 3 years of believing he'd failed his daughter, and the truth had been far worse than his darkest fears. "We can't stay here," he said finally. "They'll be back." "Where can we go? Crane owns this whole territory." Eli stood shouldering his rifle. "Then we don't run, we fight." But their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a single horse approaching. Not the thunder of a posse, but something more cautious. Through the barn slats, Eli saw his neighbor Walt Gribbin dismounting with his characteristic oily smile. Walt owned the successful ranch to the east, making Eli's struggling farm look pathetic by comparison. He was also a man whose greed was matched only by his cowardice. "Afternoon, Eli. Heard there's been some excitement." "Nothing that concerns you, Walt." Gribbin's eyes darted toward the barn. "See, that's where you're wrong. I was in town this morning. Heard about this reward. $10,000. His smile widened. Now I got sharp eyes. Saw something interesting during that storm. Someone running across my land heading this direction. The threat hung in the air like smoke. How much? Well, now I was thinking we could work out an arrangement. Partner-like. You got something valuable, I got information Crane would pay for. Eli studied his neighbor's weak chin, shifty eyes. Half. You keep quiet, you get half of whatever comes my way. Half of 10,000, or half of whatever I decide you're worth. And that depends on how well you keep your mouth shut. Gribbin nodded quickly. Deal. But Eli, if this goes sideways, I'll throw you to the wolves. Fair enough. But Walt, if you double-cross me, you better hope Crane finds you first. After Gribbin left, the sound of distant gunfire echoed across the desert. Single shots spaced apart, not battle, but execution. Through field glasses, Eli could see smoke rising from Red Mesa's main street. They're killing witnesses, Miriam said quietly. Anyone who might have seen what happened at the convent. The weight of realization settled over them. They weren't just fleeing corrupt law enforcement, they were running from systematic genocide. All the more reason to move, Eli said. Soon as dark falls, we head north. And go where? Eli thought of his daughter, of the promise he'd made to protect her, of how thoroughly he'd failed. However far it takes. Darkness fell over Red Mesa like a burial shroud. Eli had spent the afternoon preparing, gathering supplies, checking weapons, trying to convince himself he wasn't making the biggest mistake of his life. Sister Miriam was stronger now, able to stand and walk short distances. Mags had worked her usual magic, combining folk remedies with medical knowledge to bring the nun back from the brink. Aunt Road Norths watched. Mags said, consulting a hand-drawn map by lantern light. But there's old Apache trails through the canyons. Harder going, but they'll keep you hidden. How do you know Apache trails? The old woman's eyes twinkled. Boy, I've been in this territory since before it was territory. Learned plenty from folks who knew the land better than any white man. She traced a route with her finger. Follow Willow Creek to the Red Rocks, then northeast through Devil's Canyon. Comes out near Copper Falls. 2 days hard riding. 3 with her condition. But it'll get you clear of Crane's reach. As they studied the map approaching, horses made them freeze. But this was a single rider, moving carefully. Deputy Cole emerged from the darkness, his face grim. Come alone, need to talk. About what? About what happened in town today. About why you need to get that nun as far from here as possible. Cole's news was worse than they'd feared. The gunshots had been executions. 3 witnesses from St. Cecilia's shot dead while resisting arrest. A shopkeeper who'd seen too much found hanged, labeled suicide. 2 families asking questions about missing children had simply vanished. Crane's lost his mind, Cole said. He's killing anyone who might contradict his story. Says it's about maintaining order. And the other deputies. Cole's laugh was bitter. Some go along, others. He unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a deputy's badge pinned inside. Others are wondering if they joined up to serve justice or a madman. There were others at the convent, Miriam said. Sister Mary Catherine spoke out against Mother Superior Agnes. Brother Paul questioned the transfers. Where are they now? Dead. Agnes said they died in the fire, but I saw her lock them inside. Heard them screaming. The barn fell silent, except for wind through wooden slats. Outside, a coyote howled a sound that echoed the grief building in their hearts. There's something else, Cole said. He pulled out an elaborate silver rosary with a Celtic cross. Found this in the Henderson place. Family of 4 vanished. But before they disappeared, Mrs. Henderson was asking about her nephew Timothy, sent to St. Cecilia's 2 years back. Miriam gasped. That's Mother Superior's. But why would she, unless she's hunting the families? Anyone with relatives at the orphanage. Or covering up her own crimes. As if summoned by their words, discordant church bells began ringing in the distance. Not the measured toll of prayer, but something urgent and wrong. St. Cecilia's, Miriam whispered. But the convent was abandoned after the fire. Through field glasses, Eli could see lights moving in the mission ruins. Not steady lanterns, but flickering torches casting dancing shadows. "They're digging," Cole said, studying the distant activity. "In the graveyard, behind the chapel." The implications hit them all at once. Bodies being moved meant evidence being destroyed. The final cleanup of a conspiracy that had claimed too many lives. "We have to stop them," Miriam said, struggling to her feet. "Those graves. Some of those children are buried there, without proper markers, without their real names. If they move the bodies now, there'll be no proof they ever existed." "You're in no condition to travel, let alone fight," Mags protested. "Then we don't fight," Eli said quietly. "We bear witness." He looked at each of them, the broken nun with her terrible knowledge, the old healer with fierce loyalty, the deputy wrestling with conscience. None were warriors, but all had reached the point where doing nothing was no longer an option. "No, Cole, can you get us close without being seen?" "Old trail up the backside of the canyon. Used to be a supply route. But if we're caught, we won't be, because we're not giving them the chance." As they prepared to leave, Mags pressed a small derringer into Miriam's hands. "Just in case. And girl, don't hesitate. Mercy's a luxury you can't afford." They set out into the night, Eli, Miriam, Cole, and Mags, along with Walt Gribbin, who had returned with news of strangers camping on his land. Above them, stars wheeled in ancient patterns, indifferent to human drama. But somewhere in that darkness, justice waited to be served. The old supply trail wound through Devil's Canyon like a scar, barely wide enough for horse and rider. Eli led the way, his mount picking carefully through loose shale that threatened to betray their position. Behind him, Sister Miriam clung to her saddle with grim determination, face pale but resolute. Deputy Cole brought up the rear hand, never straying from his weapon. Every shadow might conceal an enemy, every sound could signal discovery. The church bells had stopped their discordant ringing, leaving only wind through stone and the muffled sounds of their passage. As they crested a ridge overlooking St. Cecilia's, the scope of desecration became clear. The graveyard had been torn apart, headstones scattered like broken teeth, graves yawning open in torchlight. Dark figures moved among the ruins with methodical efficiency, loading wooden boxes onto wagons that disappeared into the night. "Jesus Christ," Cole whispered. "They're moving them all, every last body." Through field glasses, Eli counted at least 20 men working with more standing guard. This wasn't hasty cover-up. It was military operation planned and executed with ruthless precision. "There." Miriam pointed to a figure supervising from atop a wagon. Even at this distance, the silhouette was unmistakable, flowing robes of a nun, but worn by someone who moved with authority. "Mother Superior Agnes." "Thought she was dead," Cole muttered. "Sister Agnes has always been good at being whatever people need her to be," Miriam said bitterly, "including dead when it suits her." They watched in horrified silence as systematic destruction continued. Small graves, children's graves, were being emptied with particular care, their contents transferred to unmarked boxes that would disappear forever. Decades of secrets buried with innocent victims. Eli was about to signal retreat when movement in the chapel ruins caught his eye. A lone figure had separated from the work party and was climbing toward their position, moving with careful stealth. "Someone's coming," he hissed, but it was too late. The figure emerged directly behind them, Sister Agnes herself, no longer the frail, elderly woman from town. Her face was granite eyes burning with fanatic purpose. In her hands, she held a rifle pointed at Miriam's heart. "Sister Miriam, I should have known you'd survive. You always were too stubborn to die properly. Mother Superior, still cleaning up your messes, I see." Agnes's laugh was cold as winter wind. My mess's child, you understand nothing. I understand enough. About the children, about what you did to them, how you marked the troublemakers for Crane's attention. Is that what you think? Agnes stepped closer, and in the torchlight, tears streamed down her face. Is that really what you think this is about? The anguish in her voice was so genuine that even Cole lowered his weapon slightly. This wasn't heartless villain. It was the sound of a soul being torn apart. Then tell me, Miriam said. Tell me what it's really about. Agnes was quiet for a long moment, rifle never wavering, but composure cracking. When she spoke, words came in a rush as if a dam had burst. Do you know what it's like to watch children disappear and be helpless to stop it? To know that every word you speak might sign another death warrant. To be forced to choose which ones live and which ones die over and over. What are you talking about? Crane has had leverage over me for 15 years. Photographs, compromising letters, evidence that could destroy not just me but the entire order. He uses that to make me complicit, to make me choose. She gestured toward the graveyard. Every child in those graves I tried to save. I marked the ones strong enough to survive being transferred to other institutions. The ones who could keep quiet, who could disappear into new lives. But the others were killed. Eli said, voice barely a whisper. The others were doomed from the moment they arrived. Children who'd seen too much, knew too much, couldn't be trusted to stay quiet. I could either let Crane kill them all or choose which ones might have a chance. Tears flowed freely. Your daughter, Mr. Barrett, Emma. She was one of the strong ones. I marked her for transfer, not death. But Crane, the world tilted. What about Emma? Agnes's composure shattered completely. She's alive. Emma's alive. But she's not safe, and she won't be until Crane is dead and buried. Silence followed, broken only by distant sounds of grave robbers. In a few sentences, everything Eli thought he knew had been turned upside down. His daughter, his Emma, was alive. Where is she? Safe, hidden, but not for long. Crane's been hunting down every child who was transferred instead of killed. He calls it cleaning house. Then why are you helping him now? Because he has Emma. Because he has 6 other children in a place I can't reach. Because every night I don't cooperate is another night one of them doesn't see dawn. She lowered her rifle's shoulders, sagging with years of impossible choices. I've been trying to save what I could while playing his game. Moving the bodies tonight isn't about destroying evidence. It's about giving them proper burial away from this cursed place. The letters I've been leaving, the supplies I've been hiding for escapees. I've been fighting him the only way I could. Miriam stared at the woman who had been both mentor and tormentor. The night I escaped, you were there in the alley. I was praying you'd make it, and I was ready to die trying to help you. The revelation reshaped everything they thought they knew. Sister Agnes wasn't their enemy. She was fellow victim caught in the same web of corruption that had claimed so many others. But if Agnes was telling the truth, they faced something far worse than corrupt sheriff covering up crimes. They faced systematic campaign of terror that had been going on for over a decade, with tentacles reaching into every aspect of territorial government. How many children are still alive? Eli asked. 7 that I know of for certain. Emma and 6 others all held at different locations. Crane moves them regularly, uses them as insurance against anyone who might expose him. Agnes wiped her eyes. Every month he brings me proof they're alive. And every month he reminds me what will happen if I step out of line. Then we end this, Cole said grimly. Tonight, take down Crane and his whole operation. With what army? He has 20 armed men down there, and that's just the ones you can see. He's got deputies, bounty hunters, hired guns throughout the territory. And somewhere he's got those children hidden where we'll never find them. A new voice cut through darkness. Maybe you won't, but I might. They spun to see Walt Gribbin emerging from behind a boulder, but he wasn't alone. With him were three strangers, hard-faced men with the look of professional killers. Walt, what the hell is this? Gribbin's oily smile was back wider than ever. This, my friend, is business. Turns out there's more than one party interested in Sister Miriam. Crane ain't the only one willing to pay. The lead stranger stepped forward, lean with dead eyes and silver stars on his vest. Federal Marshal Tom Garrett. We've been tracking this situation for months. Federal marshals out here without jurisdiction? We have jurisdiction wherever federal crimes are committed. And what's been happening at St. Cecilia's definitely qualifies. Eli studied the man's face, too perfect clothing, soft hands for someone who lived rough. You're not federal marshals. You're Crane's cleanup crew. Garrett's smile was thin as a blade. Very good, Barrett. Took you longer than expected, but you got there. The trap had been perfect. While they'd focused on Agnes in the graveyard, they'd walked into an ambush. Gribbin had been playing both sides, feeding information to whoever paid better. Walt, you know what you've done. What these men are going to do. I know $10,000 is more money than I'll see in 5 lifetimes. Sorry, Eli, but a man's got to look out for himself. And the children. Miriam asked, her voice carrying dignity that made even Garrett's companions shift uncomfortably. Emma Barrett and the others, are they part of your business arrangement? Garrett's expression never changed. Loose ends need to be tied up, all of them, not just for Miriam, not just for the adults who'd stumbled onto truth, but for 7 innocent children whose only crime had been witnessing things they weren't supposed to see. Agnes raised her rifle again, but this time it wasn't pointed at Miriam. No, not the children. I won't let you hurt the children. Sister Agnes, you've played your part admirably, but your usefulness is at an end. We have new arrangements. You bastards never intended to honor our agreement. You were going to kill them all along. Of course we were. Did you really think we'd leave witnesses to 15 years of profitable arrangements? Did you think Crane would retire quietly and never mention names? The revelation that even Agnes had been betrayed galvanized something in the old nun. Years of compromise, of impossible choices of trying to save what she could while serving monsters, it crystallized into pure, righteous fury. Sister Miriam, she said without taking her eyes off Garrett. When I say run, you run. Don't look back, don't hesitate, just run. I won't leave you. You'll do as you're told, child, for once in your stubborn life. What happened next unfolded with terrible inevitability. Agnes swung her rifle toward Garrett just as Cole drew his sidearm. Gribbin dove for cover. And in the chaos, as gunfire erupted across the canyon rim, Eli made a choice that would haunt him forever. He grabbed Sister Miriam and threw them both off the edge of the cliff. The fall seemed to last forever, tumbling, spinning descent through darkness, punctuated by rifle fire above, and approaching rush of canyon floor below. Eli wrapped his arms around Miriam, trying to shield her as they crashed through scrub brush and bounced off rocky outcroppings. They hit hard, rolling down steep slope of loose shale and scattered boulders. Pain exploded through Eli's left shoulder as it struck stone, and he felt something tear in his chest. But they were alive and hidden in deep shadows at the canyon wall's base. Above them, the gunfight continued. Orange muzzle flashes lit the rim like deadly fireworks, accompanied by shouts and curses. Someone screamed, high agonized sound that cut through night. Then gradually shooting died away. Sister Agnes, Miriam whispered, voice thick with grief. Don't think about it now. Eli replied, though his own heart was breaking. The old nun had sacrificed herself to give them a chance. Can you move? Miriam struggled to sit up, wincing as movement aggravated her injuries. I think so. My leg... Something's wrong. Blood seeped through her torn habit, but there was no time for medical attention. From the rim came voices, Garrett's men organizing a search. They had minutes at most. This way, Eli said, helping her to her feet. Old mining tunnels in these canyon walls, if we can reach them. They stumbled through darkness, Miriam leaning heavily on Eli's good arm while he bit back curses with every step. His shoulder felt like fire, and breathing sent sharp pains through his chest. But Emma was alive. Somewhere his daughter was alive, and that knowledge drove him forward when his body wanted to collapse. Behind them, torches appeared on the canyon rim. Garrett's voice echoed off stone walls. They can't have gone far. Spread out, check every shadow, every cave. 10,000 to whoever brings me the nun. The old mine entrance was hidden behind dead vines, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Eli had discovered it years ago while hunting back, when he still had hope. Now it might be their salvation or tomb. The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing them to crawl through passages carved by long-dead miners seeking silver that had never materialized. Air was stale and thick with dust, and somewhere ahead, water dripped with the patience of centuries. They crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably minute sounds of pursuit growing fainter. Finally, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber where they could stand. Eli risked lighting a match, revealing ancient tool marks and skeletal remains of mining equipment. "We can't stay long," he said as Miriam slumped against the wall. "They'll bring dogs, maybe dynamite. This place won't hide us forever." "Then what do we do? 7 children are going to die because I couldn't save them." "No. 7 children are going to live because we're not giving up. Agnes didn't sacrifice herself so we could hide in a hole." He struck another match and examined their surroundings more carefully. The chamber had 3 other exits, narrow passages leading deeper into the mountain. One might connect to the network of natural caves that honeycombed this part of the territory. If they could reach those caves, they might have a chance. "The letter," Miriam said suddenly. "Do you still have it?" Eli felt inside his jacket and breathed relief. Morrison's testimony was still there, stained with blood and dirt, but intact. "Got it. But what good does it do if we can't get it to someone who matters? Deputy Cole, if he survived, Cole's dead. They all are. Garrett doesn't leave loose ends." The match burned down to his fingers, and darkness reclaimed the chamber. In absolute blackness, their situation seemed hopeless. 2 wounded fugitives trapped in a mine shaft, hunted by professionals with unlimited resources. Even if they escaped, where could they go that Crane's influence didn't reach? Then from somewhere deeper in the tunnels came a sound that made them both freeze. Footsteps. Slow, careful, but definitely human. "They found us," Miriam whispered. Eli drew his pistol, though he knew it was probably futile. In these narrow confines, whoever was approaching had all the advantages. But he'd be damned if he'd go down without a fight. The footsteps stopped just outside the chamber. A voice called out, familiar, but changed somehow. Older, more careful. "Pa, is that you, Pa?" Eli's heart stopped. He knew that voice, had heard it in his dreams every night for 3 years. But it was impossible. A hallucination brought on by blood loss and desperation. "Pa, it's me, it's Emma." A figure appeared in the chamber entrance, backlit by torchlight from the tunnel beyond. Small, thin, dressed in boy's clothing that hung loose on her frame. But the face, God in heaven, the face was exactly like her mother's had been at that age. "Emma." Eli's voice cracked. "Emma, is it really you?" "Yes, Pa. I've been looking for you for so long." She ran to him then, and he caught her in his arms, ignoring the pain in his shoulder and chest. She was real solid, alive. His daughter, his little girl, miraculously returned. But even as tears of joy streamed down his face, part of his mind noted details that didn't fit. Emma was too thin, too watchful. Her eyes held knowledge no child should possess. And there were scars on her arms, faint but visible, that spoke of years of careful abuse. "How did you find us?" Sister Miriam asked gently. Emma pulled back from her father, suddenly cautious. Sister Agnes told me. Before they killed her. She said you were coming, said I should watch for you in the tunnels. Agnes is dead. Eli asked, though he'd already known the answer. They shot her when she tried to protect Deputy Cole. But before she died, she gave me this. Emma held up a small brass key. Said it opens the place where the others are hidden. Said you'd know what to do with it. The key was warm in Eli's palm, still carrying the heat of the old nun's sacrifice. On it was engraved a single word, redemption. Do you know where the others are? Miriam asked. Emma nodded solemnly. There's a place, an old fortress up in the mountains. That's where Sheriff Crane keeps us when we're not being moved. He calls it his insurance policy. How many guards? Usually 4 or 5. But they're not expecting trouble. They think everyone who knows about us is dead now. Eli studied his daughter's face in the flickering torchlight. 3 years of separation, 3 years of believing she was gone forever. And here she was, not just alive, but ready to help save the others. She'd grown up in the worst possible circumstances, but she'd grown up strong. It's dangerous, he warned. If we're caught, if we don't try, the others die. Emma interrupted. And Sheriff Crane wins. Sister Agnes said you were a fighter, Pa. She said you'd never let him win. From somewhere in the tunnels behind them came the sound of barking dogs. Garrett's men had brought tracking hounds, and they were closing in fast. Then we better get moving, Eli said, holstering his pistol. Show us the way, sweetheart. Show us the way to redemption. But as they prepared to follow Emma deeper into the tunnels, she stopped and looked back at them with eyes that held more pain than any 12-year-old should carry. There's something else, she said quietly. Something you need to know about what's really happening here. What do you mean? Crane isn't just killing witnesses. He's not just covering up what happened at the orphanage. Emma's young face was ancient with terrible knowledge. There's something under Red Mesa, something he's been digging for all these years. That's why he needed the children, not just to hurt them, but to work in places adults couldn't fit. The words hit Eli like a physical blow. What kind of something? Silver. Lots of it. A whole vein that runs under the town and out into the desert. But it's deep and the passages are narrow. He's been using children as miners, working them to death in tunnels that would collapse if men tried to work them. Sister Miriam gasped. That's why so many children were marked as transferred, but never seen again. They weren't transferred, they were sent to the mines. Some of them are still down there. Emma said, her voice barely a whisper. The ones who are still small enough to fit through the passages. He keeps them chained underground, forces them to dig until they die. The revelation reframed everything they thought they knew about Crane's operation. It wasn't just about covering up abuse. It was about protecting a secret silver mine that had made him rich while literally working children to death. Where? Eli asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. The entrance is hidden in the old church basement. That's why he had to control the convent, why he needed Sister Agnes to keep quiet. The whole thing was built over the mine entrance. How many children are down there now? I don't know. Maybe a dozen, maybe more. They keep them separated so they can't organize, can't fight back. Emma's voice cracked. Some of them have been down there for years, Pa. Years without seeing sunlight. The sound of baying hounds was getting closer. They had to move. But this new information changed everything. It wasn't just about rescuing 7 children from a fortress. It was about freeing an unknown number of children from an underground hell. We can't do both, Miriam said, reading his thoughts. We can't hit the fortress and the mine at the same time. Yes, we can, Emma said with the quiet certainty of someone who'd been planning this for a long time. Because I know something Crane doesn't know I know. The tunnels connect. The mine passages link up with these old mining tunnels, and they both connect to the fortress. She pulled out a piece of paper, a crude map drawn in charcoal on what looked like a piece of torn fabric. I've been exploring every chance I got, mapping the connections. Sister Agnes helped when she could, bringing me supplies, helping me understand the layout. The map showed an intricate network of tunnels and passages, natural caves connecting to man-made mines, all converging on a central chamber beneath Red Mesa. It was like a spider web of stone and darkness, with the fortress, the church, and the old mining claims, all connected by underground passages. If we can get to the central chamber, Emma explained, we can access all 3 locations. Free the children from the mines, get to the ones in the fortress, and maybe even find evidence of everything Crane's been doing. And if we get trapped down there, then we die together, Emma said simply. But Pa, some of those children have been praying for someone to come for them for years. I won't abandon them now. The hounds were getting closer. Whatever they were going to do, they had to do it now. They lead the way, Eli said, making the decision that would either save them all or doom them all. But Emma, stay close. And if something happens to me, you get Sister Miriam out of here and find the federal marshals, the real ones. Nothing's going to happen to you, Pa, Emma said with the fierce determination of a child who'd already lost too much. Not on my watch. They plunged deeper into the mountain, following passages that seemed to twist and turn without logic or reason. Emma led the way with the confidence of someone who'd memorized every step, every turn, every potential hiding place. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as they descended into the heart of the mountain. The passages were narrow and treacherous, forcing them to crawl in some places, to squeeze through gaps barely wide enough for an adult body. But Emma moved through them like a ghost. Gradually, Eli began to hear something that made his heart race with hope and terror. Voices, children's voices echoing through the stone from somewhere ahead. Not the happy chatter of children at play, but something sadder, more desperate. The sound of young voices raised in song, as if music was the only thing keeping them sane in the darkness. We're close, Emma whispered. The central chamber is just ahead. As they rounded a final bend, the passage opened into a vast underground cavern lit by torches and oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. And there, in the center of the chamber, was a sight that would haunt Eli's dreams for the rest of his life. Dozens of children, ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 14, all chained to the walls or to heavy iron posts driven into the stone floor. They were filthy, emaciated, many bearing the marks of brutal treatment. But they were alive, and when they saw Emma, their faces lit up with hope. "Emma," one of them called out. "You came back. I told you I would." Emma replied, her voice strong, despite the tears streaming down her face. "And I brought help." But even as Eli's heart swelled with relief at finding the missing children, he could hear sounds from the passages they'd just traveled. Footsteps, voices. Garrett's men had found their trail and were closing in. "How do we get them out?" he asked, looking at the heavy chains and iron restraints. Emma held up the brass key Sister Agnes had given her. "This opens the main locks. But there are guards." As if summoned by her words, armed men began emerging from other passages, not Garrett's crew, but Crane's mine guards, alerted by the commotion. They were rough, brutal men, who'd been paid well to keep the children in line and their mouths shut. Well, said the largest of them, a man with scarred hands and dead eyes. "Look what we got here. The Barrett girl and some friends." "Hello, Mackenzie," Emma said calmly. "Come to check on your slaves. Come to put you back where you belong, little girl. You and your friends." But Emma was already moving not toward the guards, but toward the chained children. The brass key worked perfectly, and the first set of chains fell away with a clatter that echoed through the chamber. "Run!" she shouted to the freed children. The passages behind me follow them up and out. What followed was chaos. The guards opened fire, but the children scattered like startled rabbits, their small size and knowledge of the tunnels making them nearly impossible to hit. Eli returned fire, using every round to maximum effect, while Sister Miriam helped free more children with the key Emma had given her. But the guards weren't their only problem. From the passages behind them came the sound of Garrett's men finally catching up to their quarry. They were trapped in the chamber, caught between two groups of armed killers with nowhere to run. "This way," Emma shouted, pointing to a passage Eli hadn't noticed before. "It leads to the fortress." As bullets flew and children screamed, they fought their way toward the narrow opening. But not all of them would make it. One of the guards, a man with a rifle and a clear shot, was taking aim at Emma. Sister Miriam saw the danger and threw herself between the gun and the child. The rifle cracked and she spun around, blood spreading across her habit. But her sacrifice gave Eli the opening he needed. His pistol spoke once, and the guard fell. "Miriam," he shouted, catching her as she collapsed. "I'm all right," she gasped, though blood was flowing freely from her shoulder. "Get the children out. Get them to safety." "I'm not leaving you. You have to. Emma needs you. They all need you." But before he could argue further, a new voice cut through the chaos. Sheriff Crane himself had arrived, flanked by more deputies than Eli could count. The man who'd terrorized Red Mesa for 15 years stood in the entrance to the chamber, his face twisted with rage. "Now that's enough," he roared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Nobody moves, nobody shoots, or I start killing children." The chamber fell silent, except for the whimpering of frightened children and the drip of water from somewhere in the darkness. Crane stepped forward, his gun trained on Emma. "You stupid little bitch," he snarled. "Did you really think you could escape me? Did you really think anyone would believe your lies? They're not lies," Emma said, her young voice carrying across the chamber with surprising strength. "And people already believe them. Federal marshals are coming, real ones this time. Your friend Garrett won't be able to help you much longer." Crane's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Federal marshals? You think I'm worried about federal marshals, little girl? I own half the territorial government. I've got judges, senators, even a few congressmen in my pocket. Nobody's coming to save you." "Maybe not," said a familiar voice from the shadows. "But somebody already did." Deputy Cole stepped out of one of the side passages, his uniform torn and blood-stained, but very much alive. Behind him came old Mags, carrying a rifle that looked almost as old as she was, and behind her, "Jesus Christ," Crane whispered, his face going white. Behind Mags came a dozen men Eli didn't recognize, real federal marshals with real federal warrants and enough firepower to take on a small army. Leading them was a man in a black suit who carried himself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Sheriff Virgil Crane. The man said, his voice carrying the weight of federal law. "I'm Marshal William Hayes, Territorial District. You're under arrest for conspiracy murder, kidnapping, slavery, and about 20 other federal crimes." "You can't prove anything," Crane snarled, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Actually, we can," Hayes replied. "Sister Agnes left us quite a collection of evidence before she died. Letters, photographs, financial records going back 15 years. Plus, we have the testimony of dozens of witnesses who survived your little operation. And we have this," Cole added, holding up Father Morrison's letter. "A complete confession from your partner detailing every crime, every murder, every child you've destroyed." The fight went out of Crane all at once. He looked around the chamber, at the freed children, at the federal marshals, at the evidence of his crimes laid bare, and seemed to age 10 years in as many seconds. "You think this ends it," he said finally, his voice bitter with defeat. "You think taking me down makes you safe. There are others, bigger fish than me. This whole territory is rotten from top to bottom. Maybe, Eli said, holding Emma close as federal marshals moved to take Crane into custody. But it's a start. As the chamber filled with the sounds of children being freed from their chains of federal agents, securing evidence of justice finally being served, Emma looked up at her father with eyes that had seen too much but still held hope. "Is it over, Pa?" she asked. "Is it really over?" Eli looked around at the rescued children, at Sister Miriam being tended by a federal medic, at the man who terrorized them all being led away in chains. It wasn't over. It would never be completely over. The trauma, the scars, the memories would take years to heal. But the nightmare was ending. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, kissing the top of her head. "It's over." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they were only the beginning of a longer story. The story of healing, of rebuilding, of learning to trust again. The story of children who'd survived hell and found their way back to light. The story of a town that had learned to stand up to evil and demand justice. The story of redemption. 6 months later, as spring painted the canyon walls in shades of green and gold, Eli Barrett's farm had been transformed. The house had been expanded with the help of federal funds earmarked for victim assistance. The barn rebuilt, and the fields were green with crops that promised the best harvest in years. 13 children now called it home. Emma and the 12 others who'd been rescued from Crane's underground hell. They'd all been offered placement in proper orphanages or with distant relatives, but most had chosen to stay together, to heal together, to build something new from the ashes of their shared trauma. Sister Miriam, who now simply went by Miss Miriam, had recovered from her wounds, thrown herself into the work of caring for the children. She'd left the church officially, but her faith had only grown stronger through the ordeal. She and Eli had developed a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose, and something deeper that neither had yet found words to describe. Emma had blossomed in ways that amazed her father daily. The hollow-eyed, fearful child who'd been taken from him had grown into a young woman of remarkable strength and compassion. She helped care for the younger children, worked alongside him in the fields, and had even begun teaching reading and writing to the other survivors. The other children were healing too, each in their own way and at their own pace. Some showed remarkable resilience, bouncing back with the adaptability of youth. Others bore deeper scars that would take years to heal. But all of them had something they'd never had before: safety, stability, and the unconditional love of a family that chose to stay together. As for Red Mesa itself, the town had undergone its own transformation. With Crane's reign of terror ended and his network of corruption exposed, new leadership had emerged. Deputy Cole had been elected sheriff in a landslide, running on a platform of transparency and justice. Old Mags had become something of a local hero, her role in the rescue operation earning her the respect she'd always deserved. The silver mine had been sealed permanently, its tunnels filled with concrete to ensure no one would ever again be tempted to use child labor for profit. The money Crane had stolen was being used to build a proper school, a new church, and a memorial to the children who hadn't survived. Walt Gribbin had been arrested along with Crane, his role in the conspiracy earning him a federal prison sentence. His ranch had been sold to pay restitution to the victims, the proceeds helping to fund ongoing care for the survivors. On this particular evening, as Eli sat on his front porch, watching the sun set over land that was finally at peace, his thoughts weren't on the past or its painful memories. They were on the future, and the sound of children's voices calling him to dinner and the way Miriam's smile made him believe that healing was possible, even for hearts as broken as his had been. Emma came out to sit beside him, now 13 and growing taller every day. She'd been quiet lately, working on something she wouldn't tell him about, spending hours writing in a journal she carried everywhere. She said finally. "I've been writing down everything that happened, all of it. Sister Miriam says it's important to remember so it never happens again." "That's a good idea, sweetheart. What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to send it to newspapers, to federal officials, to anyone who will listen." She looked up at him with eyes that held both wisdom and innocence. "I want people to know that children matter. that we're not just property to be bought and sold, that we have voices and we deserve to be heard. Eli felt a surge of pride that nearly took his breath away. His daughter, his remarkable, resilient daughter, was going to make sure the world knew what had happened here. She was going to be their voice, their witness, their advocate. "Any regrets, Pa?" she asked, using the old endearment that still made his heart skip. Eli considered the question seriously. 3 years of grief and guilt, followed by weeks of terror and violence that had nearly cost them everything. But here they were alive, and together, and surrounded by a family they'd never expected, but couldn't imagine living without. "Just one," he said finally. "What's that?" "I regret that it took so long for me to learn that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born with." Emma nodded, understanding, passing between them without need for words. In the distance, church bells were ringing. Not the discordant alarm they'd heard that terrible night, but the gentle call to evening prayer that spoke of community and hope and the promise of tomorrow. "Dinner's ready," Miriam called from the doorway, her voice carrying the warmth of a woman who'd found her true calling at last. As they stood to go inside, Emma paused and looked back across the valley toward Red Mesa, where lights were beginning to twinkle in windows of homes, where families were gathering for their own evening meals. "Think we'll ever have to fight like that again?" she asked. Eli followed her gaze, thinking of all the small battles that made up daily life, all the choices between right and wrong, that every person faced, all the times when ordinary people had to find extraordinary courage. "Probably," he said honestly. "But next time, we won't be fighting alone." They went inside then, to warmth and light, and the sound of children's laughter, to a table surrounded by faces that had become as precious as blood family, to a life rebuilt from ashes and stronger for having been tested by fire. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, watching over a land where justice had finally found its voice, and evil had learned that there were some things, love, hope, the protection of the innocent, that no amount of corruption could destroy. In the distance, a coyote howled, but it was no longer a sound of loneliness or despair. It was the song of survivors and the call of the wild, the voice of a land that had known darkness but chosen light. The story of Red Mesa was ended, but the stories of its people, the survivors, the fighters, the ones who'd chosen love over fear, those stories were just beginning. And in years to come, when other children in other places faced their own darkness, they would hear the story of Emma Barrett and the children of Red Mesa, and they would know that even in the deepest night, dawn always comes for those brave enough to keep fighting for it. The devil had held Mesa for 15 years, but in the end, love had proven stronger than evil hope, more powerful than despair, and the voices of children more enduring than the silence of the grave. Justice had come to Red Mesa at last, carried on the courage of ordinary people who'd found extraordinary strength when they needed it most. And in the end, that had been enough. It had been more than enough. It had been everything.